The Arizona sunset stretched across the vast expanse like spilled watercolors, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as Elena Rodriguez guided her battered pickup truck to the side of the dusty road. Smoke billowed from under the hood, a final death knell for the vehicle that had carried her and her 5-year-old daughter Lucia across 3 state lines. "Just a little farther," she whispered, more to herself than to the sleeping child in the passenger seat. But the truck had other plans. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena rested her forehead against the steering wheel, exhaustion washing over her like a physical weight. Behind them lay Sacramento and the memories she was desperate to outrun. Ahead, somewhere beyond this desolate stretch of highway cutting through Saguaro Valley, waited the promise of a new beginning, if she could just get there. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through her moment of despair. Elena glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as a lone rider approached from the direction of the setting sun. Her hand instinctively moved to the glove compartment where she kept her father's old revolver. 5 years as a single mother had taught her caution above all else. The rider slowed as he approached, a tall figure atop a chestnut quarter horse. His face was shadowed beneath a well-worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Car trouble?" His voice carried across the still evening air, deep but gentle. "Just overheated," Elena replied, not mentioning that this was the 3rd time today. "We'll be fine once it cools down." The man dismounted with practiced ease, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He approached slowly, hands visible, as if understanding her wariness. "Name's Jackson Garrett," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "My ranch is just over that ridge. Not much out here for miles, ma'am." "Elena," she offered reluctantly. "Elena Rodriguez. And my daughter, Lucia." She gestured toward the sleeping child. Jackson glanced at the truck, then at the gathering darkness. "That engine's not overheated, ma'am." "That's a blown head gasket if I've ever seen one." His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-weathered face, held no judgment. "Won't be any mechanics until you reach Copper Springs, and that's 30 miles east." Elena felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. 30 miles, with a sleeping child and everything they owned packed in garbage bags in the truck bed. The meager remains of her savings wouldn't cover both a tow and repairs. "I can give you a ride to town tomorrow," Jackson offered, "but it's getting dark. Nights get cold out here in April. My ranch has a spare room above the stable, clean, warm. You and your daughter are welcome to it." Every instinct honed from years of disappointment told Elena to refuse. Strange men with kind offers rarely came without strings attached. Yet something in his steady gaze suggested otherwise. "I have a shotgun," she blurted out, immediately regretting the admission. To her surprise, Jackson's face broke into a smile that transformed his solemn features. "Good. Everyone should." He stepped back, giving her space. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Tanner, lives on the property. She's about 70 and meaner than a rattlesnake when her soaps are interrupted. You'll be safer with her than with that revolver you've got your hand on in the glove box." Elena felt her cheeks flush at being so transparent. Lucia stirred then, dark eyes blinking open, immediately wary of the stranger. "Mama?" The little girl's voice was thick with sleep. "It's okay, mija," Elena reassured her. "This is Mr. Garrett. He's offered us a place to stay tonight while our truck rests." She kept her tone light, protective of her daughter's sense of adventure rather than feeding her fears. Jackson crouched down to the child's eye level, maintaining a respectful distance from the truck window. "Ever ridden a horse, Miss Lucia?" The little girl's eyes widened, her head shaking solemnly. "Well, Cinnamon here is the gentlest horse in Arizona. She'd be mighty honored to carry such an important passenger." The simple kindness, addressing her daughter directly, with respect, shifted something in Elena's assessment. "We don't want to impose," she said, even as she calculated their dwindling options. "It's no imposition," Jackson replied, straightening. "Garrett Ranch has stood in this valley for 3 generations. We've never turned away travelers in need." His expression grew somber. My grandfather's rule said the desert doesn't forgive those who ignore its harshness or its lessons in compassion. The sincerity in his voice resonated with something long dormant in Elena's heart. With a single nod, she made her decision. "Just for tonight," she said firmly. "And we'll work for our keep." Jackson shook his head. "Hospitality isn't a transaction, Ms. Rodriguez." He moved toward his horse. "Let me help you secure your truck and gather what you need for tonight." As they transferred the essentials to Jackson's saddlebags, Elena couldn't help but notice the careful way he handled their meager belongings, treating each mismatched bag with the same respect he might afford fine luggage. When he lifted Lucia onto the saddle with gentle hands, ensuring she was secure before helping Elena mount behind her, the little girl's delighted giggle pierced the gathering dusk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Garrett Ranch emerged from the twilight like something from another time. A sprawling adobe homestead with a wraparound porch, nestled against the protective embrace of red rock formations. Solar panels glinted alongside traditional windmills, an unexpected marriage of old and new. As they approached, lights winked on across the property, warm and welcoming against the rapidly darkening sky. A plump, silver-haired woman appeared on the porch, arms crossed, her expression suspicious until Jackson called out, "Mrs. Tanner, we have guests in need of the stable apartment." The woman's demeanor transformed instantly. "Well, bring them in then. Supper's nearly ready, and these night winds are no place for a child." Her voice carried the no-nonsense authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Within an hour, Elena found herself seated at a massive oak table in a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and spices, watching in amazement as Lucia, normally so shy with strangers, chattered animatedly with Mrs. Tanner about the horses she'd glimpsed in the paddock. Jackson moved quietly around them, setting the table with the easy competence of a man accustomed to domestic tasks. "So," Mrs. Tanner said, placing a steaming bowl of beef stew before Elena, "where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking? Not many travel through Saguaro Valley, unless they're lost or running." Her directness was tempered by genuine concern. Elena stiffened, but found herself answering truthfully. "Tucson. My cousin has a restaurant there. She's offered me work." Jackson nodded approvingly. "Maria's Cocina? On Valencia Road?" Elena's surprise must have shown on her face. "Best chile rellenos in southern Arizona," he explained with a slight smile. "Your cousin has a good reputation. Hard worker." "It runs in the family," Elena said, unable to keep the defensive edge from her voice. "We'll be on our way tomorrow, once I figure out the truck situation." Mrs. Tanner and Jackson exchanged a glance that Elena couldn't quite interpret. "Miguel won't be back from Phoenix until Thursday," Mrs. Tanner said. "He's the best mechanic in the county." "I can't wait until Thursday," Elena protested. "We need to get to Tucson. Rosa is expecting us." Jackson considered this as he served himself stew. "I could take a look at it tomorrow. I'm no Miguel, but I can at least tell you if it's worth fixing, or if you'd be better off looking for another vehicle." "I can't afford another vehicle," Elena admitted, the words tasting bitter. "Well," Mrs. Tanner interjected practically, "no sense worrying about it tonight. The stable apartment is made up with fresh linens, and there's plenty of hot water for showers." She smiled at Lucia. "And I believe I have some books that haven't been read in far too long. Would you help an old woman by reading them again?" Lucia's eager nod eased some of the tension in Elena's shoulders. As they finished the meal, the first home-cooked food they'd had in days, Elena couldn't help but wonder at the strange twist of fate that had led them here, to this kitchen, to these unexpectedly kind strangers. Later, as she tucked Lucia into the surprisingly comfortable bed in the neat, clean apartment above the stables, her daughter asked the question that had been lingering in Elena's own mind. "Mama, is Mr. Jackson an angel, like in the stories Abuela used to tell?" Elena smoothed back her daughter's dark hair, considering the question with more seriousness than she might have before today. "I don't think so, Mija. I think he's just a good man. They still exist, even if they're rare." "Like Papa was?" Lucia's voice held the innocent curiosity of a child too young to remember the father who'd walked out before her second birthday. Elena swallowed hard. "Yes? Like Papa could have been, she said carefully. Now sleep. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Long after Lucia's breathing had deepened into slumber, Elena stood by the window, looking out over the moonlit ranch. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonesome cry echoing across the valley. From this vantage point, she could see the main house, a single light still burning in what she guessed was the kitchen. Jackson Garrett was an enigma, a cowboy straight out of some romanticized vision of the West, yet there was a quietness to him that spoke of depths beneath the stereotype. His kindness seemed genuine, but Elena had learned the hard way that kindness often came with hidden costs. A soft knock at the apartment door startled her from her thoughts. Heart racing, she moved quietly across the room, one eye on her sleeping daughter. "Who is it?" she called softly through the door. "Just me," came Jackson's low reply. "Brought some clothes that might fit the little one. Found them in a storage trunk. My sister's kids left them last time they visited." Elena opened the door cautiously. Jackson stood a respectful distance away, a small stack of neatly folded children's clothes in his arms. Behind him, the stable was quiet except for the occasional soft nicker from the horses. "Thank you," Elena said, accepting the bundle. "You didn't have to do that." Jackson shrugged, the movements silhouetted in the dim light. "Seems to me life's hard enough without a child having to wear the same clothes day after day." There was no judgment in his tone, only understanding. "We left in a hurry," Elena found herself explaining, though she owed him no explanations. "There wasn't time to—" "No need to explain," Jackson interrupted gently. "We all have our stories, Ms. Rodriguez. Some are just more complicated than others." The simple acceptance in his words loosened something tight in Elena's chest. "Elena," she corrected, "if we're accepting your hospitality, you might as well use my name." His smile flashed white in the shadows. "Elena, then. Sleep well. The coffee will be on by 5, but no one will disturb you if you sleep later." As he turned to leave, Elena called after him softly, "Why are you doing this?" "Helping strangers?" Jackson paused, considering her question. "Because when I was 16, my truck broke down outside El Paso. A family took me in for 3 days while it was fixed. Wouldn't take a dime." He looked out toward the distant mountains, their silhouettes black against the star-strewn sky. "My grandfather used to say that kindness is a circle. It comes back around if you keep it moving." With that, he descended the stairs, his boots making little sound on the wooden steps. Elena stood in the doorway long after he'd disappeared into the main house, the borrowed children's clothes clutched to her chest like a shield against a world that had rarely shown such uncomplicated generosity. Morning came with the scent of desert sage and the distant bawling of cattle. Elena woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where they were, until Lucia's excited voice brought reality rushing back. "Mama, look! Horses!" Her daughter stood at the window, her small face alight with wonder as she pointed to the paddock where several horses grazed in the early morning light. Elena joined her, wrapping an arm around the child's shoulders. From this vantage point, they could see much of the ranch coming to life. A few ranch hands moved between outbuildings, and in the distance, cattle dotted the landscape like mobile shadows. It was beautiful, in a rugged, untamed way that tugged at something primitive in her soul. "Can we stay here forever?" Lucia asked, leaning into her mother's embrace. Elena's heart clenched. How quickly children adapted, finding security in the simplest offerings of kindness. "No, mija. Remember, we're going to Tia Rosa's in Tucson. You'll have cousins to play with, and a real school to attend." Lucia's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the resilience that sometimes broke Elena's heart. Too young to have learned such acceptance of life's disappointments. They dressed quickly, Lucia delighting in the new clothes that fit her surprisingly well. A simple breakfast had been left outside their door. Fresh bread, fruit, and a thermos of still hot coffee, along with a note in a strong, sure hand. "Gone to check your truck. Back by 9. JG." The consideration of not wanting to wake them brought a lump to Elena's throat that she quickly swallowed down. Gratitude was dangerous. It created obligations she couldn't afford. They found Mrs. Tanner in the main house kitchen, kneading dough with flour-covered hands. "Well, good morning," the older woman greeted them warmly. "Jackson's gone to look at your truck, but he said to tell you Miguel called. He's coming back early. Should be here by this afternoon to give a proper assessment. Relief and apprehension warred within Elena. I appreciate that, but we really need to get moving. My cousin is expecting us. Mrs. Tanner fixed her with a knowing look. Running towards something or away from it? She asked bluntly. Elena stiffened. I don't know what you mean. The older woman smiled kindly, the lines around her eyes crinkling. No offense meant, dear. It's just that in my 73 years, I've learned that people in a hurry are usually one or the other. She turned to Lucia. Would you like to help me feed the chickens, young lady? They get very cross if their breakfast is late. Lucia looked to Elena for permission, practically vibrating with excitement. After a moment's hesitation, Elena nodded. Stay where Mrs. Tanner can see you, she cautioned. As the pair headed out to the chicken coop, Elena found herself alone in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Photographs covering one wall in neat frames, showing what must be generations of the Garrett family. Handmade quilts draped over chairs. Copper pots hanging from a rack that gleamed with years of use and care. She moved to the photo wall, drawn by curiosity. Jackson appeared in many of the images, from a gap-toothed boy on his first horse to a solemn teenager accepting what looked like a rodeo trophy. A wedding photo caught her eye. Jackson, younger but unmistakable, standing beside a beautiful woman in a simple white dress, both radiating happiness. My wife, Catherine. Jackson's voice came from behind her, causing Elena to startle. I'm sorry, she said quickly, stepping back from the wall. I didn't mean to pry. Jackson shook his head, moving to stand beside her. He smelled of dust and motor oil. No secrets here, just memories. His finger gently touched the frame. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer? The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. I'm sorry, Elena said again, this time with genuine feeling. Jackson nodded once, acknowledgement rather than acceptance. Your truck, he said, changing the subject, is fixable, but it'll take parts and labor. Miguel can do it, but it'll be at least 3 days. Head gasket's shot, and there's some damage to the radiator as well. Elena's stomach dropped. 3 days? I can't. We need to. She stopped, recalculating rapidly. How much will it cost? Jackson hesitated. About $1,200, give or take. The figure hit her like a physical blow. Nearly everything she had left. And if I wanted to sell it for parts? Maybe $300-400 in its current condition. Not enough for bus tickets and a fresh start. Not enough for anything. Elena turned away, unwilling to let him see the panic rising within her. There's another option, Jackson said carefully. Ranch is short-handed right now. Spring calving season keeps everyone busy, and Mrs. Tanner could use help with the house and meals for the hands. He paused. Room, board, and fair wages while your truck gets fixed. Miguel can work on it in the evenings. Elena turned back to him, suspicion flaring. Why would you offer that to someone you don't even know? Jackson's blue eyes held hers steadily. Because I do know something about you, Elena Rodriguez. I know you're a mother who's trying her best in difficult circumstances. I know you're proud and capable. A small smile touched his lips. And I know Mrs. Tanner hasn't taken to anyone so quickly since my Catherine arrived here 15 years ago. The mention of his late wife seemed to hang in the air between them, a reminder of his own losses. Elena found herself wanting to ask more, to understand what had shaped this solitary cowboy with the unexpected capacity for kindness. Instead, she asked the practical question. And after the truck is fixed, what then? Then you drive to Tucson, or wherever else you decide to go. Jackson's voice held no expectations, no hidden agenda she could detect. Life's full of detours, Elena. Sometimes they're just delays. Sometimes they're new directions entirely. Before she could respond, the back door burst open, and Lucia ran in, her face flushed with excitement. Mama, I collected eggs, real ones, from real chickens. Behind her, Mrs. Tanner entered at a more sedate pace, carrying a basket filled with brown eggs, a look of unabashed approval on her face as she watched the child. She's a natural, the older woman declared, quick hands and a gentle touch. Elena looked at her daughter's joy, then at Jackson's open, honest face, and finally at Mrs. Tanner's knowing smile. 3 days, perhaps a week. What was that in the grand scheme of things? Rosa would understand the delay. "All right," she said finally. "We'll stay until the truck is fixed, but I insist on working for our keep. Both room and repairs." Jackson extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Elena took it. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but not overpowering. "Welcome to Garrett Ranch," he said simply, "temporary home to wayward travelers since 1889. As their hands parted, Elena felt something shift within her, a loosening of the constant vigilance she'd maintained for so long. Perhaps, just for these few days, she could allow herself and Lucia this unexpected respite. Perhaps, in this valley they'd never meant to enter, they might find more than just a repaired truck and a brief delay in their journey. The desert sun climbed higher, promising another day of clear skies and new beginnings. The days at Garrett Ranch fell into a rhythm as natural as the rising and setting of the Arizona sun. Elena, determined to earn her keep, threw herself into work alongside Mrs. Tanner. Her city-trained hands quickly developed calluses from scrubbing, cooking, and mending, but she welcomed the physical labor. It kept her mind occupied, prevented it from wandering back to Sacramento and the shattered remnants of the life she'd fled. Lucia blossomed like a desert flower after rain. The formerly quiet child who had spent too many hours in cramped apartments while Elena worked double shifts now ran freely across the ranch's open spaces, shadowing Mrs. Tanner and developing an unexpected bond with Jackson's elderly border collie Scout. Each evening she returned to their temporary quarters above the stable with sun-kissed cheeks and endless stories of chickens named, calves observed, and desert treasures discovered. On their third morning, Elena was kneading bread dough in the kitchen when Jackson entered, hat in hand. "Miguel says the parts for your truck won't arrive until next Tuesday," he announced without preamble. Supplier in Phoenix had a back order. Elena's hands stilled in the dough. "Next Tuesday. Nearly a week away. I should call my cousin," she said. "Let her know we're delayed." Jackson nodded. "Phone's in my office. Take your time." He hesitated, then added, "If you'd like, there's a cutting in the south pasture today. Thought Lucia might enjoy seeing the wranglers work. Mrs. Tanner's planning to drive out with lunch for everyone." Elena glanced at her daughter, who sat at the kitchen table carefully drawing pictures of horses with crayons Mrs. Tanner had unearthed from some forgotten drawer. The hope in the child's eyes was unmistakable. "That sounds fine," Elena conceded, unable to deny her daughter this simple pleasure. "If we're not imposing." "Imposing?" Mrs. Tanner scoffed, entering with a basket of fresh laundry. "Child, your bread saved us all from my biscuits this morning. Jackson's too polite to say it, but the men were about ready to mutiny over my cooking." The older woman winked at Lucia. "Your mama has magic in her hands." After finishing the bread, Elena retreated to Jackson's office to call Rosa. The space reflected its owner, practical, orderly, with touches of unexpected warmth in the handcrafted bookshelves and the Navajo rug on the floor. The call was brief but difficult. Rosa's thinly veiled impatience made it clear that her offer of employment came with an expiration date. "Another cook asked for the position yesterday," Rosa informed her. "I can only hold it until the end of next week. After that, business is business, prima." "I understand," Elena replied, fighting to keep disappointment from her voice. "We'll be there as soon as the truck is fixed." By the time she hung up, Elena's shoulders felt weighted with renewed anxiety. She stood by the window looking out at the vast expanse of the Garrett Ranch. In the distance, dust rose from the south pasture where the cattle cutting was underway. Strange how quickly this place had begun to feel like sanctuary rather than a temporary stop. "Bad news?" Jackson's voice came from the doorway. Elena turned, composing her expression. "Just impatient family," she said lightly. "The job will still be there, but I'm on notice not to delay much longer." Jackson nodded, studying her with those clear blue eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Miguel's good at what he does. Your truck will be ready on time." He paused. "You're welcome to join us at the cutting. Might do you good to get away from the house for a few hours." The genuine concern in his voice touched something Elena had carefully walled off. "Thank you," she said. "I think I will." The south pasture hummed with activity when they arrived. Cowboys on horseback skillfully separated cattle from the herd, guiding them through a complex series of pens. Lucia watched wide-eyed from the safety of Mrs. Tanner's old pickup truck, asking endless questions that the older woman answered with patient detail. "Your daughter's a fast learner," Jackson commented, appearing beside Elena as she laid out the lunch Mrs. Tanner had prepared. "Been explaining to Mrs. T how branding works, why we vaccinate, everything. Got a curious mind." Pride warmed Elena's chest. She's always been that way, even when— She stopped herself, unwilling to venture into the difficult past. Jackson didn't press. Instead, he gestured toward a young heifer being gently guided into a holding pen. "That one's special. Born during the worst blizzard we've had in decades, last January. Found her mama dead from exposure, but somehow the calf survived. We brought her into the kitchen, if you can believe it. Mrs. Tanner nearly had my hide for the mess, but the little fighter made it." Elena watched the animal, now healthy and strong, showing no sign of her traumatic beginning. "You named her?" Jackson's smile was sheepish. "Miracle. Not very original, I know." "But accurate," Elena replied softly. For the rest of the afternoon, Elena found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life. Jackson introduced her to his crew, a diverse group of men and women who clearly respected their boss and welcomed the visitors without prying questions. By the time they returned to the main house, dusty and tired, Elena felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. That evening, after Lucia had fallen asleep, Elena sat on the small porch outside their apartment, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. The sound of boots on the stairs announced Jackson's arrival before she saw him. "Mind some company?" he asked, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. Elena gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Your ranch, your porch." "Your temporary home," he countered, handing her one of the mugs. "Hot chocolate. Mrs. Tanner's secret recipe. Claims it's been in her family since the Spanish arrived." The rich, spicy chocolate warmed Elena from the inside out. They sat in companionable silence, watching the night deepen across the valley. "Can I ask you something?" Elena finally ventured. Jackson nodded, his profile strong against the starlit sky. "Your wife, Catherine, the photos in the house." She hesitated, unsure if she was overstepping. "What about them?" His voice remained gentle, encouraging rather than defensive. "You looked happy, very happy." Jackson's gaze remained on the distant horizon. "We were. 15 years together, since high school. She taught at the elementary school in Copper Springs. Loved every minute of it." His voice held pride even through the evident pain. She was the heart of this place. "What happened?" Elena asked softly. "Ovarian cancer. By the time they caught it." He shook his head. 5 years this June." Elena's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Life happens," Jackson said simply. "Good and bad. Catherine used to say that the measure of a person isn't what happens to them, but what they do with it." He turned to look at her directly. "Which brings me to my question, if you don't mind." Elena tensed, suddenly aware of how much she'd revealed of herself these past days without saying anything explicit. "Depends on the question." "What are you running from, Elena Rodriguez?" His voice held no accusation, only gentle concern. The question hung between them, weighty as a storm cloud. Elena's instinct was to deflect, to offer the simplified version she'd crafted for strangers. Instead, she found herself speaking truth into the desert night. "My ex-husband, Carlos. He's being released from prison next month." The words felt strange, spoken aloud after being carried silently for so long. Drug charges, initially, then domestic violence when she stopped, conscious of Lucia sleeping just inside. When things got bad, Jackson remained silent, allowing her the space to continue at her own pace. "I testified against him," Elena said, her voice growing stronger. "Helped put him away for 5 years. His family, they're still in Sacramento. They've made it clear they think a son belongs with his father." She took a deep breath. Even if that father once put his mother in the hospital. Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. "So Tucson isn't just about a job." Elena shook her head. "It's about disappearing. starting over where Carlos and his family can't find us." She stared into her mug, watching the steam rise. "Rosa is my mother's cousin. We're not close, but she's family. Family without connections to Carlos. And the truck breaking down here was the last thing I needed," Elena finished. "Every day delayed is a day closer to his release." She looked up at Jackson, suddenly defensive. "I'm not running away. I'm protecting my daughter." "I never thought otherwise," Jackson said quietly. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. "Courage comes in many forms, Elena. Sometimes it's standing your ground. Sometimes it's knowing when to seek safer ground." The simple validation loosened something in Elena's chest. For years, she'd carried not only the weight of her decisions, but the burden of defending them. To disapproving family members who thought she should work it out with Carlos. To well-meaning friends who didn't understand the depth of her fear. "What will you do in Tucson?" Jackson asked. "Cook at Rosa's restaurant, find an apartment, enroll Lucia in school. Build something stable." The plans sounded simultaneously mundane and monumental. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Cooking's more than just a job for you, isn't it? I've seen how you come alive in the kitchen." Elena smiled, surprised by his perception. "It was my dream once. Culinary school, my own restaurant eventually. Before Carlos, before life took a different turn." "Dreams don't have expiration dates," Jackson said, echoing words her grandmother had once spoken. "Some do," Elena countered. "Some get replaced by more important ones." They fell silent again, the night wrapping around them like a familiar blanket. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. Elena found herself oddly comfortable in Jackson's presence, as if they'd known each other far longer than a handful of days. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Jackson raised an eyebrow questioningly. "For not saying that everything happens for a reason," Elena clarified. "For not trying to find meaning in the chaos." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Catherine would have my hide if I spouted platitudes like that. She had no patience for them." He stood, collecting their empty mugs. "Get some rest, Elena. Tomorrow's Saturday, pancake day. Mrs. Tanner will have us all up at dawn." As he descended the stairs, Elena called after him softly. "She sounds like she was remarkable, your Catherine." Jackson paused, looking back up at her. "She was. And she would have liked you very much." With that, he continued down the steps, disappearing into the shadows of the stable below. Elena remained on the porch long after he'd gone, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future not constrained by fear, one where Lucia grew up safe and happy, where Elena's own dreams might still have room to breathe. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed to exist only in postcards. True to Jackson's warning, Mrs. Tanner had everyone up early for her legendary pancake breakfast, a ranch tradition, Elena learned, that stretched back decades. The kitchen buzzed with activity as ranch hands wandered in and out, filling plates with golden stacks drizzled with local honey and fresh berries. Lucia, now comfortable among these once strangers, chattered happily with Miguel about the progress on their truck, her Spanish flowing freely as she described the horses she'd seen yesterday. "Your daughter has a gift for languages," Jackson commented, appearing at Elena's side as she flipped pancakes alongside Mrs. Tanner. "Miguel says her Spanish is excellent. Her father's parents only spoke Spanish at home," Elena explained. "I wanted her to keep that connection, even after." She let the sentence trail off, focusing on the batter in front of her. Jackson nodded, understanding the unspoken. "We're heading into town after breakfast for supplies. Thought you and Lucia might like to come along, see a bit more of the area." The invitation was casual, but Elena caught Mrs. Tanner's knowing glance. The older woman had taken to making subtle comments about that handsome boss of mine needing company his own age. "I should help with lunch preparation," Elena demurred. Mrs. Tanner snorted. "Nonsense. I managed to feed this crew for 30 years before you arrived. Go. The child should see more than just ranch fences." And so, an hour later, Elena found herself in the passenger seat of Jackson's truck, Lucia securely buckled between them, heading toward the small town of Copper Springs. The drive was spectacular, winding through red rock formations and stretches of desert in full spring bloom. Copper Springs revealed itself as a town caught between eras. Historic buildings from its mining heyday now housed artisan shops and cafes, while pickup trucks and the occasional luxury SUV from Tucson visitors lined the main street. Jackson greeted nearly everyone they passed, introducing Elena and Lucia simply as friends staying at the ranch, with no further explanation offered or expected. At the general store, an elderly man behind the counter lit up at their arrival. "Jackson Garrett! About time you showed your face in town." His sharp eyes took in Elena and Lucia with undisguised curiosity. "And you've brought company, Frank. This is Elena Rodriguez and her daughter Lucia," Jackson said easily. "Their truck broke down near the ranch. Miguel's fixing it up." Frank nodded sagely. "Miguel's the best mechanic in 3 counties. You're in good hands." He leaned across the counter toward Lucia. "And I believe I have some fresh rock candy that needs testing. Scientific process, you understand." While Lucia shyly accepted the offered treat, Elena browsed the store's eclectic inventory. Jackson efficiently collected his supplies, adding them to a running tab that suggested the arrangement was long-standing. "The Garretts have kept an account here since my grandfather's time," Frank explained, catching Elena's questioning look. "Jackson's people have been the backbone of this community since before it was even called Copper Springs." Outside the store, they ran into a young woman who introduced herself as Diane, the local elementary school principal. "Jackson Garrett," she scolded playfully. "You missed the last school board meeting." "Spring calving," he apologized. "Couldn't get away." Diane turned her attention to Lucia. "And who is this young scholar? I don't believe we've met." "This is Lucia," Jackson said. "She and her mother are staying at the ranch temporarily." "Lucia, Ms. Winters is the principal of our school here." The woman crouched down to Lucia's level. "Do you like school, Lucia?" The child nodded solemnly. "I was in kindergarten in Sacramento, but Mama says I'll go to a new school in Tucson." "Well, we have a wonderful kindergarten here," Diane said warmly. "If you were staying, that is." She straightened, addressing Elena. "We're always looking for good families in the district." "We're just passing through," Elena clarified quickly. "My truck needed repairs." Something in Jackson's expression caught Elena's attention, a flicker of what might have been disappointment, quickly masked. As they continued their errands, Elena found herself wondering about that look, about the life Jackson had built here, about the obvious respect he commanded in this close-knit community. She thought of Catherine, the school teacher who had been the heart of Garrett Ranch, and how her absence was still felt, not just by Jackson but by the town itself. Their final stop was the local farmers market, a surprisingly vibrant affair for such a small town. Jackson led them through the stalls, greeting vendors by name, introducing Elena and Lucia with the same easy manner he displayed throughout the day. At a booth selling handmade soaps, the elderly Navajo woman behind the table took one look at Lucia and pressed a small lavender sachet into her hands. "For sweet dreams," she said, her weathered face breaking into a smile when Lucia thanked her in careful Spanish. "Mrs. Begay doesn't usually give her sachets away," Jackson commented quietly as they moved on. "They're quite special." "Should I have refused it?" Elena asked, concerned. Jackson shook his head. "No, it was a gift freely given. She's a good judge of character." By the time they headed back to the ranch, the truck bed was filled with supplies, and Lucia was nodding off against Elena's shoulder, tired from the excitement of the day. The drive back was quiet, comfortable, the landscape golden in the late afternoon light. "They're good people," Elena observed as they passed the town limits. "Everyone seems to know everyone." "Small towns," Jackson agreed. "They have their challenges, but there's something to be said for community, for belonging somewhere people know your history, your family. And your business," Elena added wryly. Jackson laughed, the sound warming the cab of the truck. "That too. But when things get tough, they show up. When Catherine was sick, there was always someone bringing food, helping with the ranch, just sitting with her when I couldn't be there." His voice softened. "You can't put a price on that kind of belonging." Elena thought of the anonymous apartment complexes she'd moved between in Sacramento, of neighbors who barely nodded in passing, of the isolation that had allowed Carlos's abuse to escalate unnoticed. "No," she agreed quietly, "you can't." Back at the ranch, they found Miguel waiting with news about the truck. "Parts should be here Monday morning," he reported. "If all goes well, she'll be running by Tuesday afternoon." Tuesday. The deadline loomed suddenly larger in Elena's mind. 3 more days of this unexpected respite, and then back to the original plan. Back to running. Back to starting over in yet another unfamiliar place. That night, after Lucia was asleep, Elena stood again on the small porch, looking out at the ranch that had become, in less than a week, something dangerously close to home. The lights of the main house glowed warm in the distance. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the future waited. Uncertain, daunting, but necessary. For the first time since fleeing Sacramento, Elena allowed herself to acknowledge the exhaustion that came with constant vigilance, with always looking over her shoulder. The Garrett Ranch had offered more than just temporary shelter. It had given her a glimpse of what safety might feel like, what community might mean for Lucia. But safety was an illusion. No place was beyond Carlos's reach if he was determined enough. And Jackson, kind, steady Jackson with his blue eyes and quiet strength, he deserved better than a woman with her kind of baggage, her kind of fear. Tuesday, she reminded herself firmly. Tuesday they would leave. As planned. This detour, this valley, this cowboy with the heart of gold. They were just a temporary chapter in the longer story of starting over. Nothing more. But as she turned to go inside, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted within her. For the first time in years, she had allowed herself to imagine possibilities beyond mere survival. For the first time, she had glimpsed not just safety but belonging. The revelation was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Sunday morning dawned with an unexpected blessing. Rain. Not the violent summer thunderstorms that would come later in the year, but a gentle, persistent shower that painted the desert in shimmering silver. Elena woke to the rhythmic drumming on the roof above their apartment, a sound so soothing that she allowed herself the luxury of lingering in bed, watching Lucia's peaceful sleeping face in the soft gray light. Rain meant no outdoor work. Rain meant a day of enforced stillness, something Elena had forgotten how to embrace during years of constant motion and vigilance. By the time she and Lucia made their way to the main house, the kitchen was already filled with the tantalizing aroma of Mrs. Tanner's famous beef stew, the ranch's traditional rainy day meal, simmering low and slow for hours. "Perfect timing," the housekeeper greeted them. "I was just about to send Jackson to fetch you. Can't have you two trapped in that apartment all day." Jackson sat at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched on his nose, papers spread before him. He looked up as they entered, his smile warming his eyes. "Mrs. Tanner's convinced we'll all starve if left to our own devices for more than an hour," he said, winking at Lucia, who giggled in response. The day unfolded at a leisurely pace. The ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse for cards and stories, while in the main house, Mrs. Tanner produced a box of board games that had gathered dust since Catherine's passing. Lucia, initially shy about the unfamiliar games, soon had both adults laughing with her unabashed competitive spirit. "She reminds me of you," Mrs. Tanner commented to Jackson as Lucia deliberated over her next move with intense concentration. "Same furrowed brow when you're thinking too hard." The casual observation sent an unexpected pang through Elena's chest. For most of her daughter's life, people had commented on how much Lucia resembled her father. The same dark eyes, the same full mouth that could curl into an identical scowl. Elena had trained herself not to flinch at these innocent remarks, not to think of Carlos's features hardening with rage as he raised his fist. Now, watching Lucia beside Jackson, she saw what Mrs. Tanner meant. Not a physical resemblance, but something in the quiet determination, the thoughtful approach to challenges. "Checkmate," Lucia declared triumphantly, having somehow maneuvered her pieces while the adults were distracted. "That's chess, dear," Mrs. Tanner corrected gently. "In checkers we say king me." "King me, then," Lucia amended, her smile undiminished. Jackson laughed, conceding defeat with grace. "Your daughter's a strategist," he told Elena. "Better watch out, or she'll be running the whole show before she's 10. The simple pleasure of the moment, the rain pattering against the windows, the warm kitchen, the easy camaraderie, felt dangerously close to perfect. Elena caught herself imagining more days like this, more rainy Sundays spent in comfortable companionship. The thought carried both sweetness and warning. After lunch, while Lucia helped Mrs. Tanner organize her recipe box, a task the child approached with librarian seriousness, Jackson invited Elena to see the workshop behind the house. Catherine used to call it my therapy room, he explained as they dashed through the rain, protected by a shared umbrella. Said a man who couldn't work with his hands occasionally would lose his mind entirely. The workshop, when he unlocked and opened the door, took Elena's breath away. Sunlight filtered through skylights, illuminating a space that smelled of cedar and linseed oil. Woodworking tools hung in perfect order on one wall, while completed and in-progress pieces occupied the remaining space. Tables, chairs, intricate boxes, and what appeared to be a half-finished rocking horse, all crafted with evident skill and patience. "Jackson," Elena breathed, running her fingers along the satiny finish of a small jewelry box. "These are beautiful." He shrugged, but she could see the pride in his eyes. "Just a hobby. My grandfather taught me, same as he taught my father. Said working wood was good for the soul. Forces you to slow down, work with the grain instead of against it." "Like life," Elena observed softly. "Exactly like life." Jackson moved to the rocking horse, brushing sawdust from its flowing mane. "Started this after Catherine got sick. Thought we'd have children of our own to ride it someday." His voice held no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance. "Never could bring myself to finish it." Elena's heart ached for him, for the future he and Catherine had planned, now forever altered. "You should finish it," she said impulsively, "for someone else's child to love." Jackson looked at her, something unreadable passing across his features. "Maybe I will." They spent the next hour in the workshop, Jackson showing Elena different projects, explaining techniques, occasionally demonstrating a particularly challenging cut or joint. His passion for the craft was evident in every movement, every detailed explanation. This was a side of the stoic rancher few people likely saw, the artist within the cowboy. "You could sell these," Elena suggested, admiring a set of nesting bowls with intricate inlay work. "They're gallery quality." Jackson ran a hand along the rim of the largest bowl. "I've thought about it. Even had an offer from a shop in Sedona last year." He shook his head. "Haven't been ready to part with them. They were all started when Catherine was alive. Feels like letting go of something more than just wood." Elena understood completely. After leaving Carlos, she'd kept nothing from their life together except what Lucia needed. No mementos, no photographs, nothing to connect them to the past. She'd believed it was the only way to move forward. Now, watching Jackson among these beautiful objects that contained both joy and pain, she wondered if completely severing ties with the past was always the wisest choice. "Maybe start with something new," she suggested. "Something that's just yours, not connected to those memories." Jackson considered this, nodding slowly. "Might be time," he agreed. "Fresh start." The phrase hung between them, laden with meaning for them both. When they returned to the house, they found Mrs. Tanner and Lucia deep in preparation for dinner, the little girl standing on a stool carefully measuring spices under the housekeeper's watchful eye. "Mama," Lucia exclaimed, "Mrs. Tanner's teaching me to make biscuits the right way. And I told her about abuela's chili, and she said I could help make it sometime, and—" "Breathe, Mija," Elena laughed, delighting in her daughter's enthusiasm. "Girl's a natural," Mrs. Tanner declared. "Got the touch for pastry. Light hands, like her mama." The praise warmed Elena unexpectedly. In Sacramento, cooking had become merely functional. Affordable meals prepared quickly between shifts, with little room for the creativity or passion that had once driven her culinary ambitions. Here, in this kitchen, with Mrs. Tanner's encouragement and Jackson's evident appreciation for her food, Elena had rediscovered something she thought she'd lost forever. As evening fell and the rain continued its gentle rhythm, dinner stretched leisurely at the big oak table. Two ranch hands who'd been stranded at the main house joined them, bringing stories and laughter that had Lucia wide-eyed with wonder. The conversation flowed easily, touching on local history, cattle prices, and plans for the ranch's future. "Jackson's been talking about adding guest cabins down by the creek," one of the hands Tom mentioned. "Tourist dollars to supplement the cattle operation." Just an idea, Jackson demurred. Nothing concrete. A good one, though, Mrs. Tanner insisted. Plenty of city folks would pay good money for a taste of ranch life. Already get calls about it, especially from families with children. Elena could see it immediately. The potential of the place, the natural beauty, the authentic experience of Western life that tourists would indeed treasure. You could do cooking classes, she suggested, the idea forming as she spoke. Using local ingredients, traditional recipes. People love that kind of thing. See? Mrs. Tanner jabbed a finger toward Jackson. I've been saying for years we need to diversify. Even Catherine thought. She stopped abruptly, casting an apologetic glance at her employer. Catherine did think it was a good idea. Jackson finished calmly. She had plans drawn up for the cabins before she got sick. He looked at Elena. The cooking classes are a nice touch. I hadn't thought of that. The conversation shifted to other topics. But Elena caught Jackson watching her thoughtfully throughout the remainder of the meal. Later, as she helped clear the table, he touched her arm lightly. Would you mind taking a look at Catherine's plans sometime? For the guest cabins, he clarified. I'd value your perspective, as someone who's worked in hospitality. The request surprised her. Of course, she agreed, though I'm hardly an expert. You have good instincts, Jackson said simply. And fresh eyes. After Lucia was tucked into bed, Elena sat alone in their apartment, listening to the rain that still fell steadily outside. Jackson's invitation to review Catherine's plans felt significant, a small but meaningful bridge between his past and a possible future. Not their future together, Elena reminded herself firmly. Just his future, continuing the legacy he and Catherine had built. Yet, even as she tried to maintain emotional distance, Elena found herself imagining what Garrett Ranch might become with those guest cabins, with cooking classes featuring her recipes, with Lucia growing up in this wide-open space where the sky stretched forever. The image was seductive in its simplicity, its apparent safety. But safety was an illusion. Carlos would be released in less than 3 weeks. Once free, he would start looking for them, first in Sacramento, then branching out to family connections, if he discovered they'd gone to Tucson. Elena shivered despite the room's warmth. She'd come too far, sacrificed too much, to risk Lucia's safety on a cowboy fantasy, no matter how kind Jackson was, no matter how perfect the ranch seemed. Tuesday, she reminded herself, Tuesday they would leave. Monday morning brought clear skies and the promised truck parts. Miguel arrived early, tools in hand, ready to begin the repairs that would restore Elena's mobility and signal the end of their unexpected sanctuary. Should be done by tomorrow afternoon, he confirmed as Elena watched him unload the parts. Good as new. Better maybe with the upgrades I'm installing. Elena thanked him, trying to ignore the conflicting emotions his words triggered. Relief at resuming their journey warred with a reluctance she hadn't anticipated. The day passed in a flurry of activity. Elena threw herself into helping Mrs. Tanner with laundry and meal preparation, keeping busy to avoid thinking about the looming departure. Lucia, seemingly sensing the shift in atmosphere, clung closer than usual, asking repeatedly when they would have to leave. Soon, mija, Elena answered, stroking her daughter's hair. Remember why we're going to Tucson? Tia Rosa is waiting for us. You'll have cousins to play with. Lucia nodded solemnly, though without the enthusiasm she'd shown when they first planned the move. But I like it here, she said quietly. Scout will miss me. And Mrs. Tanner, and Mr. Jackson. We'll miss them too, Elena acknowledged, her throat tight. But sometimes we have to keep moving forward. Because of Papa? Lucia asked, her perceptiveness catching Elena off guard. What do you mean, mija? Lucia looked down at her small hands. I heard you talking to Mr. Jackson about Papa coming back. Is that why we can't stay? Elena gathered her daughter close, heartbreaking that even here, Carlos's shadow had reached them. We're going to Tucson because that's our plan, she said carefully. Because Tia Rosa needs help in her restaurant, and you'll have a good school to attend. The answer seemed to satisfy Lucia, though Elena suspected her perceptive child understood more than she let on. Children who grew up in households with domestic violence developed a sixth sense for undercurrents, for reading between lines, for detecting the unspoken fears of the adults around them. By mid-afternoon, Elena found herself restless, unable to settle to any task. Mrs. Tanner, with her uncanny intuition, shooed her out of the kitchen. "Go for a walk," the older woman suggested. "Clear your head. You're as jumpy as a jackrabbit with a coyote on its tail." Taking the advice, Elena wandered toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the immediate ranch property. Jackson had mentioned it was one of his favorite spots on the ranch, a place he went to think when decisions weighed heavily. The creek burbled cheerfully over smooth stones, cottonwoods providing dappled shade along its banks. Elena followed a well-worn path, eventually coming to a small clearing where a fallen log created a natural bench overlooking a deeper pool. Here, she sat, watching the play of light on water, letting the peaceful sounds of nature wash over her. "Thought I might find you here." Elena turned to find Jackson approaching, Scout trotting faithfully at his heels. The border collie immediately came to Elena, resting his graying muzzle on her knee in silent greeting. "Mrs. Tanner said you needed some air," Jackson explained, taking a seat beside her on the log. "This is usually where I end up when I need the same." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching a dragonfly skim across the water's surface. "Miguel says the truck should be ready by tomorrow afternoon," Jackson finally said. Elena nodded, unable to look at him. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "Never an imposition," he said quietly. "Having you and Lucia here has been good for the ranch, for all of us." The sincerity in his voice compelled her to meet his gaze. What she saw there, warmth, understanding, and something deeper, made her heart skip. "Jackson," she began, then faltered, unsure what she wanted to say. "You don't have to go to Tucson," he said simply. The words hung between them, as tangible as the sunlight filtering through the leaves overhead. "What?" Elena managed, though she'd heard him perfectly. Jackson shifted slightly to face her more directly. "You don't have to go to Tucson," he repeated. "You and Lucia could stay here." Elena stood abruptly, needing physical distance from the temptation his words presented. "We can't," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "You know we can't." "Because of your ex-husband?" Jackson remained seated, giving her the space she needed. "Elena, there are other ways to handle that situation besides running." "You don't understand," she insisted. "Carlos isn't just some angry ex. He's dangerous. And his family has connections. People who could help him find us." "I understand better than you think," Jackson said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath. "My sister Rebecca went through something similar with her first husband. Thought running was her only option, too." This revelation stopped Elena's restless movement. "What happened?" "She ran for 2 years. Different names, different towns, always looking over her shoulder." Jackson's eyes darkened with the memory. "Until finally she realized that no matter how far she went, she was still living in a prison of his making." "So what did she do?" Elena asked, drawn back to sit beside him. "She stopped running, got a restraining order, made sure everyone in her community knew what he looked like, what he'd done, the sheriff, her neighbors, her co-workers. Everyone became her early warning system." He paused. "It wasn't easy. There were close calls. But she refused to let him steal her life anymore. And now? Now she lives in Flagstaff. Remarried a good man. Has 2 more kids and a catering business she loves." Jackson's gaze was steady. "She's free, Elena. Not because she outran her past, but because she faced it." Elena absorbed this, both inspired and terrified by the prospect. "It's not that simple," she protested weakly. "No, it's not simple at all," Jackson agreed. "But here's what I know. Copper Springs has a sheriff who takes domestic violence seriously. The ranch is private property with clear boundaries. Every hand who works here would know to watch for a stranger. And there's me." His voice softened. "I would never let anything happen to you or Lucia. Never." The conviction in his words shook something loose in Elena's carefully constructed defenses. For so long, she'd carried the weight of protection alone, trusted no one with their safety, relied on anonymity as their only shield. Why? she whispered. "Why would you do that for us? You barely know us." Jackson's smile was gentle. "I know enough. I know Lucia has the same laugh as my niece when she's excited about something. I know you have more strength and courage than most men I've worked with. I know that in a week, you've brought more life back to this ranch than it's seen in 5 years." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "And I know that letting you drive away tomorrow without saying these things would be the biggest regret of my life." Elena looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, hers smaller but strong in their own right. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words barely audible over the creek's gentle murmur. "I know," Jackson said simply. "Being afraid doesn't make you weak, Elena. It makes you human. But sometimes the bravest thing isn't running from what scares us. It's standing still long enough to see if it still has power over us." A kingfisher dove into the creek, emerging with a small fish wriggling in its beak. Life and death and survival playing out in a moment of perfect natural harmony. Elena watched the bird wing away, considering Jackson's words, considering possibilities she'd refused to entertain since the day she'd first fled Sacramento with Lucia. "I need to think," she said finally. "This isn't just my decision. Lucia's safety comes first." "Of course," Jackson agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands, whatever you decide." He stood, whistling softly for Scout. "Dinner's at 6. Mrs. Tanner's making her famous enchiladas in your honor." As he turned to leave, Elena called after him, "Jackson?" He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing possibilities I was too afraid to imagine." His smile warmed her from across the clearing. "That's what happens when you stop to rest in a valley like this one. Sometimes you find more than just a temporary shelter." As he disappeared back along the path with Scout trotting at his heels, Elena remained by the creek, watching the water's endless journey. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider not just survival, but the possibility of truly living again, putting down roots, building something lasting, perhaps even finding love with a cowboy whose heart seemed as vast as the Arizona sky. The choice ahead was still daunting. Carlos would always be Lucia's biological father, would always pose some level of threat. But perhaps Jackson was right. Perhaps there were ways to face that threat that didn't involve constant flight, constant vigilance, constant surrender of dreams. By the time Elena made her way back to the ranch house, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in gold and amber. Lucia sat on the porch with Mrs. Tanner, both of them shelling peas into a large bowl, their heads bent together in easy companionship. The scene stirred something profound in Elena's heart, a vision of what might be possible if she found the courage to stop running. If she dared to believe that this valley, this ranch, this makeshift family might offer not just temporary refuge, but a true home. Tomorrow, Miguel would finish the truck repairs. Tomorrow, Elena would have to make a decision that would shape not just her future, but Lucia's as well. Tomorrow would bring either a departure or a new beginning. For tonight, though, there were enchiladas to enjoy, stories to share, and one last sunset to witness over the Garrett Ranch, the place where her broken-down truck had forced her to stop long enough to remember that rest was not the same as surrender, and that sometimes the detours in life's journey led to the most unexpected destinations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.